All right, let's make sure we got our audio going. Check. Okay, great. All right, guys. Hi, welcome to Hollywood Mechanic. Today we are talking about the PTU system and some very important things for you if you're an owner or a potential owner, you're about to buy one, or you're a mechanic planning to work on one. We want to tell you today, one, how to know if the PTU is leaking, and two, how to safely drive the PTU if it has been, if it has the leak and you can't fix it. If you want to continue driving it without fixing it at the moment. And the reason for all this is we've been doing these PTU rebuilds for several years, and recently we've started seeing a lot of increased repair costs of these PTUs due to abuse and misuse, either by installing our kits incorrectly or by dealerships misleading potential buyers on the condition of the PTU. We'll get into that more later, or simply clients continuing to add ATF oil or the DCT control fluid and then continue to drive the car with a leak present in the PTU. So we're going to talk about all those things today. I know you guys probably already know a lot about the PTU. I've made plenty of videos on it. But I do have to give you a brief overview of how the system works so you can understand all the points that I'm going to make in a moment. So here we have a freshly rebuilt PTU that's about to go back into a car, the valve body that obviously sits here. And here we have a fire damage PTU. It was in a car that did catch on fire, got quite hot. We bought it because of a case. This client here had taken the PTU to be repaired somewhere else, and they had done a lot of damage to the PTU, specifically the biggest issue being the case here. We have a video showing how to do this rebuild, and there is a pin that goes into here and into the case here and locks this case in, and apparently they did not remove that pin and forced this case off and broke the case right there and tried to JB weld it back. Obviously it wasn't going to work. So we were forced to buy a PTU off of eBay and then clean up the case and put it here and rebuild that. So that's why we had this one here, but it provides an excellent test bed for us to show you how the system works. Inside of this system is a gear oil. It's a very slippery. It has a limited slip additive to allow for slipping of the friction discs of the plates of the differential, as well as the synchronizers. Unlike a normal transmission, the synchronizers are not a yellow metal. They instead have a fibrous ring on the inside here. We'll go ahead and get you right there. Much like the friction discs in a differential do, or clutches, the clutches. And that is designed to work with a limited slip fluid. So do not use a fluid without a limited slip modifier in this PTU. Now this fluid is also a 90 hot weight, or 75W90. So 90 is its operating weight, which is around 14.5 centistoke. From the kinematic scale, and it is very slippery, very thick fluid by comparison to the control fluid. The second fluid is a control fluid which sits up in a reservoir and then is pumped into here through the high pressure line into the valve body, and these solenoids direct the fluid to either control the reverse gear here, or first and second up here, or the driver's side or passenger side clutch. That's how it's able to torque vector, send torque directly to where it's needed. Now this fluid, it is a DCT clutch fluid that's used in this control. However, it is not actually coming into contact with the clutches or the clutch plates. It is only used to fill up the shift forks and the clutch actuator. So if you look into the bell housing and then also on the flange, I'm just going to be fast here, show you only this one. Inside of there is a ring that's missing. You can see two holes there, one on either side, where fluid is delivered through here, through the valve body, and that presses that actuator plate. This is what that plate looks like. We have our special installer tool on here. So this is what that actuator plate looks like, and there are some O-ring backed hard seals there on the inside and the outside. So this acts as a piston and pushes this plate which has a roller washer in there, roller bearings, and a wavy spring washer set. And these those spring washers remove the tension from the friction discs that are allowed to spin freely. And then when you want to lock up the clutch or send power to a wheel, this piston gets pushed, which compresses that spring and applies pressure to these plates and locks it up, and then you get wheel spin. That's how it works. These are very special seals that are able to work with no leak through, even with a 0 PSI startup pressure. So, you know, a lot of seals require an energizing pressure because of the design of these. They do not, and we have not been replacing these seals in our rebuilds. Now, there's only 2 other companies that I know of that are doing their own rebuilds. And one of them we don't really know much about and have had mixed reviews. The other one is, I believe it's SS Autotech in the UK. They're charging around $10,500 to rebuild the PTU. I don't know if they're replacing these seals. I've never heard them describe them. Obviously, if they were going to be selling them or replacing them, I would imagine they would advertise that. They advertise that they are replacing the shift forks, which we do not replace. You know, we did have a client who went back and forth between the 2 of us to decide which one to do. And in that time, they never talked about replacing these seals. So I don't know if they are replacing them. We now are, obviously, from the tooling we've made and everything, but why are we doing that? Well, this is an uncommon leak. That is normally not the problem. Normally the leak is coming from the seals or the bushings on the shift forks. This is what one of the shift forks looks like. It has a bronze bushing. It's turned black because of the fire, but that's what one of the shift forks looks like, assembled. And this is what it looks like disassembled. It has a plunger that has oil delivery holes on either side of a seal, and fluid can be pumped into this hole, and then it will come out of that hole, and then there's a bushing here. It'll fill that chamber behind the bushing and push the shift fork this way. And if a shift needs to happen the other way, fluid is injected, fills this bushing and pushes the shift fork that way. It's important to know for when you're trying to figure out how to test if these things are working or not. This is a very common leak. I've seen the O-rings in the case here where this shift fork sits like this. I've seen the O-rings here leak or be torn apart. I've seen them being torn apart, like literally split in half. I've seen the bushings here. That's the most common, that the snap rings and the bushings start coming off, and the bushings eventually will come loose. Or break. And it makes it very difficult to remove the snap ring when both of the tines break off of that. And so that's the most common fault. So how can you tell if that fault is happening? Well, the control fluid that controls this does not mix into this system. It's stored in a separate reservoir. We're going to show you that. For the clutch fluid, it has an O-ring here that goes into the pump system, and you can see here there's a minimum line there. The maximum line is this second bend right here. As you see this U, this top part is supposed to be the maximum line. This fluid should never go down. It's not getting used up. It's a control fluid. It should, once it's filled, stay there unless you tamper with it or if there's a leak. Now, if you're going to buy the car or you own the car and you want to know if you have a leak, what you can do to test that, as long as the system is operational and you have no warnings on the dash, this is going to work. Okay, this is what I'm about to tell you. I do have to warn you, if you have a low battery, you may get it tripped into low ATF warning and a wet mode because of a low battery. The batteries in these cars go bad often, being that they're in such a high heat environment. So if that's the case, try to charge the battery first, and with a full charge, start the car up, or start the car, run it for 5 minutes at idle, turn it off and start it again, and see if your wet mode goes away. And if you're able to use the Manatino to switch between modes, and there's no warning on ATF system on the dash, then this test will work. You're going to need to check, first of all, what the hot fluid level is on this reservoir. That reservoir is behind the driver's side headlight. We'll show you here. There's an upper reservoir that should remain empty. That's only used to fill it. And there's a rubber hose that goes between the upper and lower reservoir. You can see it right there. That hose doesn't hold fluid very well, so don't leave that with fluid in it. Again, I showed you where the full mark is. You're going to want to look down in there. you can take this trim panel off and see better, like right here back behind it. If you don't see any fluid in there at all, then, you know, pretty definitively you have a leak and a problem. But if you see fluid in there and you open the door and you hear the pump run for a few seconds and then turn off, then you know the system is trying to operate, the pump is priming, and what you're going to do is you're going to go start your car. Again, make sure you have no warnings, and then let it idle until the coolant temperature reaches maximum temperature. 90 degrees Celsius is where it should settle at. And when that, as it's warming up and idling, the clutch pump will be running, building pressure up to a preset like 850 psi amount. Then it will turn off, storing that pressure into an accumulator. That accumulator and the system will slowly leak that pressure back into the reservoir until it gets down to around 750 psi. And then the pump will trigger back on and it'll run this cycle over and over. That's normal. That's how the car is supposed to operate. If you hear the pump running like vroom, 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 constantly, most likely your accumulator is bad and there's no ability to build and regulate the pressure. That's a different video. I think we've made a video about that. But if you're hearing every, let's say, minute, the pump run for 10 seconds and then turn off, that's normal. As it's doing that, it's actually heating the fluid. And so by the time the coolant gets to its operating temperature, this fluid should be hot, all right, at its normal operating temperature. So what you're gonna wanna do then is look at this reservoir and see where the level is. Now there will be a movement of the level as the pump runs. So we're gonna leave the car idling and watch intently. So let's say that the fluid hovers like right around here. You're gonna have a maximum high and a maximum low level, meaning that when that pump turns on to build your 850 psi pressure, it will be at the top when the pump starts, and when the pump shuts off, it will be a little bit lower. It's about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch of movement on this reservoir. So depending on where your fluid level is at, use either the max high or the max low to pinpoint a spot that you can remember. Or if you're a mechanic and you have the wheel well off, mark max low or mark max high on the reservoir. The reason that's important is the fluid level may be in different levels here depending on the condition of the car. So if the max high happens to be right on this top peak, that makes it easy. Every time the pump turns on, just before it turns on, you see the fluid at that peak. Remember, okay, max high is there. If the fluid's down here somewhere and the low point happens to be on this peak, then just use some kind of position on here to remember, okay, the maximum low when the pump turns off and before the pressure starts going back in is 1/8 of an inch above this mark, then that's your position. Remember that position, because what we're gonna do next is test the system and see if it goes down. So with the engine still running, get back in the car, and you don't have to race, you don't have to go fast, you don't have to even have more than 5 feet in front and behind the car. You're just gonna put the car in reverse, back up 1 or 2 feet, stop the car, put the car in first, accelerate move 1 or 2 feet forward, stop the car, put it in reverse. Do this 20 to 30 times. It doesn't need to, you're not overworking the gearbox, you're not overworking any fluids, you're not gonna cause any damage unless there's a problem inside of there, and it won't be immediate. The damage that comes from the leak inside typically comes from driving on it and loading it. So you're not gonna cause any damage. If the dealership starts to give you a hard time about it, just say, hey, this is just a simple test to see if there's a shift fork leak present. The reason this is important is every time you shift it into first, the reverse fork at the bottom here will kick into neutral. So it'll fill this fluid chamber in the back and move the fork away from the gear. And then it will engage first and it'll kick this one forward into first gear. Then when you go hit reverse, it will fill the opposite chamber, put the first gear into the neutral position, and the opposite chamber on the reverse shaft will be filled and it will put it into reverse. This way you're getting fluid filled on both sides of the fork repeatedly. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're gonna do that, like I say, 20 to 30 times. Then put the car in parking or neutral, parking brake on, make sure it's safely not rolling. Get out of the car and look at the reservoir. Did the level change? Take your reference point. If your reference point was like, my max low is 1/4 inch above this full line, is it still there or has it gone down? If your max low is now at the full line or below, you've lost fluid. If it's higher than it was before, then there may be air bubbles in here. That's a problem. You want to stop that. There's definitely a problem and a leak and an issue. That's uncommon though. If the fluid's gone up and you don't see air bubbles, then you were not at maximum operating temperature when you started the test. So then observe where the fluid is now at a max high or max low, notate that and redo the test and see if the fluid drops. This is the best way to know if forks are leaking. If it drops even a tiny amount, because it may be just a tiny leak that's in here, then you have a leak on the clutch forks and it's time to start looking at getting it fixed. Now, this is all very important because we had a client, like I said, that was going back and forth between us and SS Auto Tech, and they wanted to know what the timeline would be for the repair and what the cost would be. And we told them up front, like, the normal rebuild is this. If you have any other damages outside of a normal rebuild, then it will cost more and take more time. His car came in and he unfortunately had metal, like you can see how the magnet here has no metal on it. And then this lower one, the reverse one, it does have metal on it. Well, this upper fork, which sits way up here in the top of the PTU, at the very top, was covered in metal. And that's a major problem because that means that this fluid was so metal filled and overfilled that it was able to splash up and get up here to this top magnet. What that caused was this overfill of the wrong type of fluid, a very thin DCT fluid that's a 6.7 cent to soak, so less than half of what the factory gear oil is for this, and also a very sticky, no-slip fluid. It's a DCT. It's designed for clutches to grip. All that fluid in there and having it overfilled caused a major overheat and loss of lubrication in the PTU. This is a small unit. This PTU is a very small unit, and if you look here, the gear oil level is set by this tube right here. I mean, before you start the car, if you're changing the fluid, you drain the fluid, put the drain plug back in, open the fill plug, pump fluid in until it's overflowing out of this tube, and then you start the car and then add more until it starts to overflow back down onto your fill plug. And then you let the car idle and let it overflow until it stops overflowing. And then that's what the manual says is the correct fluid level. So that means that if you're a mechanic, and you want to know if there's been a leak going on for a while, you could put on the lift, start the car with it cold, open your fill plug with the car running and see if fluid comes out. Once the fluid gets up to 90 degrees Celsius, if any fluid's coming out, then it's probably overfilled. However, if you're buying a car and the dealer wants to trick you, they could have reset the fluid level to the right amount just before your inspection, and you may not know. That's why this test on forks is the best way to know if you have a fault. Now this client, when it overfills, you can see there's not a lot of space in here. This starts to whip up the fluid in the gears, causing more friction, and the fluid level gets higher and higher. By the way, this is where it bolts to the engine, and there's a drain hole here for the oil to try to drain back into the bottom of the PTU. But imagine this thing being completely full and under pressure. This differential, unlike most transmissions and differentials, does not breathe to the atmosphere. It has a check valve right here. It's a ball and spring so that when pressure builds up inside the PTU, it does not open until it reaches a threshold and then it blows off that pressure. That's because it's mounted directly behind your radiator and dirty air is coming in through the radiator, and they don't want this thing, when it heats up, causing high pressure, and when it cools, creating a vacuum inside, sucking dirt into a breather system. That's why that check ball is there. But if you have this overfilled and it's creating a lot of pressure and heat, then it can start to try to push into the engine. There are two seals facing each other on the crank. They're supposed to stop that from happening. But if it were abused, like in this one where there is no breather, because we had to use it on this one because they just put a bolt in the top. And this is something that we're seeing a lot. People get sick of seeing this oil coming out and they just take it off, put a bolt in it, clean it, and then go to sell the car as if it's good. And inside there, you're creating a lot of pressure by overfilling fluid, getting it hot, and then eventually it can push its way into the engine or just start blowing out seals on the PTU. As a result of this overheating condition with too much oil and the wrong kind of oil, he started getting grayed out lines on his bearings. So I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. If you look at these ball bearing races, this is one of the races out of that Fire PTU, and you can see it's a very even color on the curve there. You're going to look at this curved surface, and it's very even. The light basically follows the curve of the race as you flex it. And then this is one that has a little bit more wear. You can see there's a gray area here on the edge that doesn't quite move. It's constantly there. Here's a more extreme version, and this is what all of his bearings look like. And this is what all of his bearings look like. You can see a sharp, like a very defined, grayed out, like matte finished line there, and that feels smooth. If you didn't know better, you'd think, okay, this is fine, it's just where the balls roll, but that's actually where the balls and cages are being destroyed. Here's a good bearing, as you can see, nice and clean edge there. It is not got any gray on it. So if you were to reinstall this bearing, these bearings would just continue to chew up and create iron, and it would get on the magnets here of these shift forks, and eventually you would lose reverse. You would also get, you know, metal in your oil, which would cause for a lack of lubrication and bearings to fail again. So in the case of this client, we then had to replace all of the bearings in the PTU, and we had never had to do that before. And so as a result of that, it took quite some time to source all of those bearings. We were sourcing them from the UK. We had distributors. One of them we could not find, this one here on the input. We found one that has a slightly lower reference speed. It's still a higher reference speed than the engine spins at, the 8,000 RPM, 8,500 RPM. So we did use a different bearing. It has the same load rating, but just a slightly different reference speed. If you know about bearings, you should know that that's the speed at which it can appropriately dissipate a certain amount of heat. It's we believe the bearing to be fine to work in it, and we have it in the client's car right now running to see what that does. But we had to go back and forth quite a bit with them. We had to estimate tariffs, which we were not buying from European suppliers. We got some from Poland, from the UK, from Germany, Austria. So, you know, we didn't actually recuperate our tariff costs on his order, and we didn't appropriately charge for the amount of time that it would take to replace those bearings. Here you can see how much metal was in his PTUs, covered all of the gears, everything. You can see also on the race here how grayed out the bearing is. And just imagine, okay, every single one of these bearings is held in by a retaining compound. It's very strong. So you have to use a puller like this, where you put this into the bearing, tighten it, get it to lock onto the bearing, then you tighten it to the shaft, and then get the two legs of this to hold onto a position to where you can start pulling it. Then you use 2 wrenches to, you know, back it out. You have to remove these retainer bolts and chase those with an appropriate tap to clean out the Loctite that's in there. Then you have to clean all the retaining compound out from where the bearing was. You have to clean the bolt from its Loctite, then press it back in using a press. And as you can tell, the back side of this is very unusual shape. So trying to get this flat to press in a hydraulic press is very difficult. The bearing tries to start to cock and move, and the same for the cover here. You can see the bearings, again, very unusual surface. And these bearings, some of them have retaining bolts, some of them do not, and you have to reapply your retaining compound, especially to the one that does not have these retainers, to make sure that that sits back in the correct place. It takes a lot of time, and the cost on this is gets kind of high. I think we still beat SS Autotech's price if you were to include the shipping and the tariffs. I'm sure we did, but it did take longer. The customer was frustrated. He was like asking for updates constantly, which, you know, we're not able to provide. I'm not able to provide because I'm working. My office manager doesn't get the answers, so he gets the question on a Monday, asks me the following day in our morning meeting. I give him an answer, and he gets back to the client. And, you know, again, shipments getting delivered. And so we got it all assembled, we put it back together, and then we went to test the system, and we had a clutch leak. What was happening with that is, because of the amount of metal in his PTU, this clutch actuator basically sits right here down in the oil, and as it moves to engage and release the clutch, it was basically packing metal into the seal and the seal surface, and it began to leak. So this was no longer any good. We had to replace that. We had to remove the clutch basket case from the car. We had to remove the pinion, which goes down in through the middle of this clutch basket, the ring gear, excuse me, and assembly, which requires these two angular contact bearings. They will come apart, trying to get them apart, and we had already replaced them, but now we had to take them back apart, which means they broke again, and we had to order more to then replace those with. And we had to have seals made, which is why we have these here. We now have these seals. We have a special set. I'll show you what the inner one looks like here. Viton-based O-ring with a hard Teflon seal, specially designed to be energized by the O-ring. To replace it, you just remove this one here, carefully install this O-ring into the middle, one onto the outer. We're going to make another video about that later. Then we had these, we designed these installer tools that you just press in to place to compress those seals. Obviously, when they're brand new, it's much more difficult than this to press them in to this adapter. Each we have two separate center adapters to locate on the various surfaces. Like for instance, one locates on this bearing here in the middle. You center that, and then by hand you slowly push this down until it transfers into the case or into the driver's side axle flange. So definitely not easy to do. We had to have these made. It did take longer. Thankfully for the client, we had a spare unit. We gave him some good seals from that. He's driving the car now. All of this could have been avoided if, when the ATF level low warning was coming on the dash, they had stopped adding fluid and drain the oil out and set the oil correctly. Okay. Also, with the clutch seals, there's a way to test that. If you're a mechanic and you want to know, hey, are the clutch seals leaking? With the Texa scanner, you can run a clutch seal test. Put a good charger on the battery that's able to maintain 13.5 volts. Turn the key on, scan up the automatic differential, automatic locking differential if you're using a Texa or whatever control module description your scanner uses. If you're using a different one, and go to clutch leak test, and you should hear the pump run, also a vibration like humming, vroom, 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 of it like triggering the solenoids for the left and right clutches, and then it will give you a readout if it passes. If you run that test 10, 15 times and you do the same thing with your reservoir, you know, mark a spot on your reservoir and watch after the 10 or 15 cycles and you see it's in the exact same position, then you do not have a clutch leak, okay? But we are adding those seals now as a drop down to our normal PTU repair kit. They do come with the angular contact bearings. It's a very difficult process. You have to install the innermost angular contact bearing into here, the one here first, then install your seal and tool, then install the basket inside of here by using something to brace the inner race and press on the bottom of the basket that goes inside of here. Once you have that fully installed, there's a spacer that goes in, then you brace the bottom basket and you install this angular contact bearing, again making sure they're facing each other the correct way by bracing the inner race here, so you're not pressing through the cage, the ball and cage. Then you need to set your pinion torque. It's a very difficult process. We'll again make a video on that, but all this could have been avoided by not driving the car with the fluid. Okay, so I know I said I would tell you how to safely drive the car if you have a leak, and here's how you do that. Say you've determined that you have a leak and there's intermix of fluid, but you can't fix it right away, or you want to drive to a repair shop or something like that. What you're going to do is you're going to put the car in the lift. There's a Oetiker clamp here that holds a hose on. You'll cut that clamp, you'll pull the hose off and drain it into an oil catch can or oil recycling. You can open the reservoir, the ATF fluid reservoir cap, to make that process go a little bit faster, but you're going to basically drain all the DCT fluid from this reservoir. You want all the fluid out of this reservoir. That way when you key on, the pump will run and it won't build pressure, and so then it'll trip the car into 4x4 fault mode, where it'll be stuck in wet mode, but it will no longer be trying to shift or move the shift forks or the clutches while you drive. It's totally safe to operate the car that way. The second thing you're going to need to do is reset this fluid level correctly. So, you know, take the drain plug out, drain the fluid out. I would take a cheaper 75W90, fill it, run it for 15 minutes just to try to flush out any DCT fluid that's still in the system or in the cooler for the gear oil, and then drain that, and then tighten your drain plug and fill the gear oil to the proper level. I'm going to tell you how to fill the gear oil the way that I do it, because the manual I don't think is the best way to do it. If you were to fill the car according to the manual on a cold day and then go drive it on a hot day, you're going to cause the fluid level to increase in the gearbox above what it should be, and it will blow that valve open. I mean, it won't damage the valve, but the check valve will spray this oily air pressure all over the front of your PTU that should be clean and new. And we discovered this by sending PTUs back after following the Ferrari manual fill procedure and then saying, oh, it leaked slightly, and it was always in the summer on hot days. And so here's what I do to fill them. With the car off, drain plug in, I pump in the oil about 2.5 quarts and then when you remove your adapter, which needs to be a strong pump, because again, you got to overcome this check valve pressure. Some oil comes out, I go ahead and cap it, start the car, let it idle, and then I come back here and I top it off again. Let the car idle until it gets to 90 degrees Celsius. At that point, I put the cap on the fill plug. All the excess oil is drained out. I take the car off the lift and I go drive around about a 5-mile radius around my shop at low speeds. Just, you know, first, second gear, slow down at first, some turns, just getting the oil hot, trying to load the oil. Then I come back here because that will actually get the oil hot. There's no, the gear oil cooler is air to oil. It's not coolant to oil. So the engine coolant temperature being at 90 degrees Celsius doesn't really help heat up the gear oil in the PTU that much. But driving it does. So after 5-10 minutes of driving it, I come back, put it on the lift, open that fill plug again, and you'll hear some pressure kind of come out as it's all hotter and expanded. Then I allow some more fluid to run out with the engine running until it reaches its equilibrium level where the fluid's right here. Then I put the fill plug back in, and then that is filled at the proper level. Another thing that you could do if you wanted to, you know, change the way that the PTU is set up is you could remove the check valve, put a nipple there with a hose that goes to a remote air filter that will allow the differential to breathe, just like a Mercedes G-Wagon has, or a Land Rover, or any other car. Just be careful to avoid the belt and the sway bars, steering rack, stuff like that, and place it somewhere safe. And that way, with that hose and filter, you'll never have it building pressure and blowing off pressure. Okay. And then also, you know, if you're about to buy a car and you see this one, how it has the white silicone. This one has never been apart. That's the factory silicone. Most of the time when they've been apart, they'll have black on there. We use black, and that means they've been taken apart. If you're about to buy a car that's been taken apart, I just want to give you a warning. These are being heavily abused. You know, I showed you that grayed out ring on the bearing from, you know, the oiling being damaged. Well, when guys over torque these shaft bolts these nuts that are behind these covers or on the input, it squeezes this race too much and puts pressure on the ball and cages and will destroy them. So it's very important, if you're about to buy one, don't just check to see if the leak is there. Check to see if it's been taken apart. And the best thing to do is go to a mechanic and have him drain the oil, take an oil sample, send it for analysis, look at the magnet on the drain plug, see if you see metal or any of the pieces of the snap rings that break on there. set the oil level to the correct amount before driving them. And if you do have it repaired by a shop or has been repaired by a shop, it's just a large chance that something's damaged. Like for instance, on this one, they broke that case, but then when we went to go put it in, we found that the DCT drain plug, the DCT control fluid drain plug had been stripped out, and we ended up having to drill that out and put a time cert in there and then change the bolt size. That you can see here, this is what it should look like. A very small bolt there. And now we had to like modify that to a much larger one. You can see here the fill plug is all rounded out. We're gonna have to replace that with one from this unit. Actually, we can't even do that because this is a different style. This one has the plug inside and that one has this tube pressed in. So I'm looking forward to dealing with that later today. But the bottom line is don't abuse your PTU and you'll keep your costs low. That's what we want to do. I think it's around $6 grand for us to rebuild a PTU normally. If you want the clutch actuator seals replaced, I know they're very expensive for us, but I think it's, you know, it's only a few more hours. I think like 4 or 5 hours of labor to do that. That may get shorter as we do more of them. 2 bearings being replaced and the actuator seals. You know, it'd be good to do it now so you don't have to do it in the next 10 years. But again, we do want to keep your cost of repair down, but if you send us one where it's like a bunch of stuff is destroyed, we may end up buying units off of eBay and trying to pick apart parts or replace a lot of bearings, and that increases your cost. So don't continue driving with the leak. Make sure you use what I'm telling you here to determine if you have a leak and then fix it, or at least set the level properly and empty the control fluid so that you can drive it safely without continuing to pump fluid into your PTU.